Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes' Godbreaker. The man who rules the world takes on the Asgardian god of thunder in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' Godbreaker in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. New York Mayor Eric Adams announced that he is going to be testing out weapons detection technology in the subway.
New York City will soon bring new technology to detect weapons into the subway system. Mayor Eric Adams, along with the MTA and NYPD, announced the pilot program could start within a few months.
We'll be publishing the impact and use policy for electromagnetic weapons detection systems here in New York City. This kicks off the 90-day waiting period before this type of technology can be tested and used in our city to help keep New Yorkers safe.
The city says an additional 1,000 police officers are now in the subway system each day. The city is also hiring more clinicians to help those suffering from mental illness.
Now, New York Mayor Eric Adams announced that he is going to be implementing a pilot program to implement weapons detection technology in the subway system. And this pilot program, in conjunction with the NYPD and the MTA, is supposed to be implementing these high-tech devices that are supposed to be able to detect weapons like guns. And this program is supposed to be something that the city is looking to make the subway safer after a disturbing surge in crime. Now, this whole pilot program is something that I would laugh at with my classic sinister laugh. However, this whole pilot program just comes across as completely pathetic and a desperate attempt to create an empty symbolic gesture to make it look like the mayor and the MTA are looking to do something serious about dealing with all of the crime that has escalated in the subways in New York City. Now, this whole pilot program basically seems like some sort of cockamamie scheme, similar to the robot that they had patrolling Times Square subway station a couple of months ago, and that robot basically wound up in mothballs. And I believe that this weapons detection technology program will also wind up in mothballs. Meanwhile, the people who made the contract for this technology will get a nice big fat payday at the expense of the city as they look to go out here and participate in this ridiculous security theater. Because that's what this is all about, basically putting on a show for New Yorkers to make it look like they really are serious about stopping all of the crime that's been going on in the subways. However, these politicians like Eric Adams and the people like Janno Lieber who are running the MTA are just coming across as extremely disingenuous, because the easiest way to deal with the crime that's going on in the subways is to go put the pressure on hard-headed Carl Heastie and Andrea Stewart Cousins in the New York State Legislature and end bail reform. Unfortunately, the members of the Blue Party don't want to swallow their pride and admit that bail reform is a complete failure, because it's the bail reform policies that were implemented by Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio that basically are creating this surge in crime. And we saw that surge in crime basically start in 2019 when the bail reform laws were basically passed. And ever since then, the courts have basically become a revolving door. And as they have become a revolving door, many of the criminals that were put on notice by former Mayor Rudy Giuliani as related to his quality of life initiative, these criminals basically see that since there is no boundary to stop them from committing small crimes, what they're doing is escalating their behavior to participate in more heinous crimes like felonies. And while Eric Adams will sit there and say it's all about recidivism, that's just complete BS. No, when there is no boundary to let people know where the line is, what they do is go out and believe that they can have incentive to participate in more heinous crimes because they will not be held accountable by the criminal justice system. That's the reason why you clearly see this surge in crime, But because the members of the Blue Party don't want to admit they're wrong, they take the beta male approach. And with the beta male approach, instead of conceding that you've made a mistake, what they do is look to go out here and try to overcompensate by trying to do something different that basically makes the problem worse. And what they do is they try to overcomplicate things by creating elaborate systems to try to counter something that could easily be fixed. No, when you're dealing with a beta male, what they will do when they see something failing is, again, not concede that they're wrong, but then create an elaborate system to try to overcompensate for not conceding that they've made a mistake. And I talk about that in depth in my book, Manginas. They look like men, but they act like ladies. And I also talk about it in my book, The Man Crisis. And that's basically what we're seeing here with New York Mayor Eric Adams. He's basically just participating in creating this elaborate whole system of this weapons detection technology to try to solve a problem that could easily be solved by Carl Heastie and Andrea Stewart Cousins in the state legislature, where the Blue Party has a majority, admitting bail reform is a failure, call up a special session of the state legislature, and then have them all just pass this legislation which repeals bail reform. That could easily solve the problem, and it could solve the problem and save the state and the city a lot of money, instead of spending millions of dollars on a pilot program on technology that will basically be mothballed just like that NYPD robot. But to do that would be admitting failure and taking responsibility. And that's something Blue Party politicians and beta males like Eric Adams just can't do, because to admit that they're wrong would to be admit that they have failed, and that would incentivize voters to vote against them in the next election. However, if they were to admit this, they might possibly be in a better place, because it would show some sort of character. But instead of trying to show character, what they're doing is what beta males do, try to go around and overcomplicate things, and with all sorts of details, with a plan that definitely will not work, because the whole concept of this weapons detection technology is guaranteed to fail, and it's guaranteed to fail because the whole idea of computerized technology detecting weapons, that's not going to really stop any sort of crime, because this whole pilot program cannot be implemented on a large scale in a state and a city that are running deficits as related to their fiscal situation. The city and the state are basically running deficits as related to our fiscal situation, and yet they find money to spend on this. But you can't spend any money to help out homeless black people, like the young man who wound up getting Jordan Neely, who got killed. I mean, he can't get a debit card that could have helped this hungry man be able to buy food, but you can find money for illegal migrants, you can find money for NYPD robots, and you can find money for weapons detection technology that cannot be implemented on a large scale, because to implement this type of technology, you would need tremendous manpower in 472 train stations. I mean, there's no way you can implement this technology when you have 472 train stations and you have multiple turnstiles. It's just not feasible. But you can't explain this to Eric Adams and Kathy Hochul and the New York State Legislature. No, you can't explain this to them, because they're running on emotion, overcompensating for the failure of bail reform, and instead of admitting that bail reform was a complete failure, by repealing this law, they allow the crime to continue to escalate, and then try to create elaborate cockamamie schemes that clearly aren't going to stop Pookie and Ray Ray, because Pookie and Ray Ray don't follow the law, and Pookie and Ray Ray basically are not going to be stopped by this, because again, this weapons detection technology is going to be buggy and glitchy, and when people are trying to get to work, they don't have no time to be going through all of this. as related to let me go through the scanner and let people go through all of this. And again, the NYPD, which is already shedding members as related to the department, the NYPD doesn't have the manpower to implement all of this in 472 stations, and that's what makes this security theater just look absolutely ridiculous, because it clearly shows the incompetence of leadership in New York, from the governor's office all the way down to the mayor's office. I mean, from the governor's office to the state legislature to the New York City mayor's office to the city council. We clearly see the incompetence of the Blue Party as related to leadership, because the answer is in front of them, and they don't want to default to use that answer, because that answer means accountability, and because that answer means accountability, they don't want to implement it because it basically says that they failed, and that basically is, again, textbook beta male and feminist behavior, never admitting that they're wrong. And when you don't admit that you're wrong, basically you just eventually are going to be forced to do it. The same way Americans had to concede as related to prohibition when organized crime had taken so much economic and political power in many cities. The economic and political power that the organized crime had received as the government wanted to stop drinking basically led to people looking to drink and participate in criminal behavior, to the point where the state or the government had to admit that they were wrong just a decade later. And the same thing here with New York City. You just need to admit that bail reform is a failure. You just need to admit that we need cash bail as a boundary for many of these criminals. Because what happened to Kalief Browder, yes, it was terrible, but the real reason why this happened to Kalief Browder was due to the incompetence of the Bronx prosecutor's office, which did not do its job by trying this case within the mandated 180 days as related to bringing a case to trial. And again, instead of solving the problem by admitting the simple mistake, in that case of Kalief Browder, we had Andrew Cuomo, Bill de Blasio, and Carl Heastie and Andrea Stewart Cousins create this elaborate bail reform plan that basically has made New Yorkers less safe. And instead of these politicians just conceding that they have made New Yorkers less safe, they continue to spend more money on more elaborate schemes and look to think that they can use these schemes to cover up their failure. But their failures basically show us how incompetent they are, because the criminal justice system basically was working fine when Kalief Browder was arrested, but the prosecutor's office was the failure. And instead of holding those prosecutors accountable, they went out here and created the bail reform laws that basically are not working, and followed it up with these discovery laws that basically make it hard to prosecute cases. And this is the core foundation of the crime wave here in New York City. And no nerd technology is going to stop a crime wave, because the way you stop a crime wave is by getting rid of the failed policies. That's how you deal with the crime, because if we were to get rid of bail reform, that would basically end everything as related to crime, and it would be a whole lot cheaper than looking to use weapons detection technology that can possibly only be something that they can only implement in 1 or 2 train stations, because it's so expensive and elaborate to make work. Moreover, this technology, and I know this because I work with tech all the time, this technology can be buggy, can be glitchy, and even can be easily defeated, like the recent new plan that the MTA had as related to their new turnstile, which basically got taken advantage of, and people basically overcame it. I mean, the thing is, what I've learned with manginas and beta males is that they'll go to elaborate lengths and overcomplicate things when the answer is staring them in the face. And they'll do this out of the pride and arrogance that they have, because in their pride and their arrogance, they just can't admit that that they've made mistakes because they want to keep their world smooth. They want to be seen in a positive light. But because they are just too proud to admit that they're wrong, they basically embarrass themselves. And what happens is people lose respect for them because they just refuse to admit, okay, I've made a mistake. I've failed at something that I've done. And instead of me taking a minute to take a look at what I've done wrong and fix what I've done wrong, what they want to do is go around the block and go several miles around. And then as they're doing this, they basically show everyone that they are incompetent because they just don't have the character to stand up and admit that you've messed up. People will respect a person who will admit, okay, I've messed up. And I had to do that this week. I made 2 videos and I didn't like the quality of those videos. So I admitted, okay, this video isn't sounding right. So what I did was delete those videos and then re-record them and do them all over again. I believe they were called Charging Star Wars to the Game and a video about Diddy Combs. And again, I did that because a man who has character can admit where he made a mistake. But when you have people in office who can't admit this, it puts people in jeopardy. And that's what's happening here in New York with this weapons detection technology. We have a mayor and politicians and people running the MTA making people less safe because they just don't want to call out the state legislature and the folks that are in charge, like Carl Heastie and Andrea Stewart-Cousins and many of the legislature, as related to bail reform, and let them know this policy isn't working. Because while people like Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Carl Heastie want to say, oh, this is about helping out black and brown people, again, how does it help black and brown people when you have black and brown people going out here and doing harm to other black and brown people who ride the subway in order to go to work? Critical question I want to ask Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Carl Heastie and the members of the New York State Legislature and the New York City Council, people like Adrian Adams, how does it help black and brown people when black and brown people are being assaulted by individuals on the subway? How does bail reform help those black and brown people who are victims of violent crime? That's the question I also want to ask Eric Adams, because it's clear to me that bail reform, we need to understand that this policy is a certified failure, just as bad as the jab mandates and prohibition, which hurt black and brown people, and again, hurt black and brown people who these people want to use as their shield to keep these failed policies in place because they don't want to be held accountable for these failures because they don't want to get voted out of office. And that just shows how they aren't concerned about serving we the people, but concerned about serving themselves with these programs and elaborate schemes that are just about putting money in the pockets of these businesses and getting kickbacks for themselves. That's what this weapons detection technology farce is all about. It's all about these people in government who are out here looking to get themselves paid. And what's sad is that these skin folk ain't kinfolk, because when we look at these policies, they're clearly failures that are done. And we're trying to say that they're making you safe, but how do you make people safe when you have people who have to wait hours on a line just to go to work? I mean, that's what this weapons detection technology basically is. I mean, it's basically going to make life just that much harder in a city that's going to cost more past 60th Street with congestion pricing, another failed plan I'll basically be cooking and roasting in a later video, because the whole congestion pricing plan basically is going to drive people out of the city and make it where they just stay local and start shopping online. But you can't explain that to many of these blue party people who are just caught up and living disconnected and detached and living in their own world. And sadly, we the people don't have the backbone or the stones to vote these imbeciles out of office. That's the saddest part about this whole situation. And that's why I can't really laugh about the situation, because these people are so pathetic. They don't see where they're going. They don't see how their plans are just completely stupid. And the sad part is you've got a mayor trying to run this jive, talking about how this is going to deal with crime. Again, if you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on this kind of technology that's going to slow people down in a city that never sleeps, that's going to affect your productivity, that's going to affect your economy, and again, it's not going to make people safe. No, the solution is staring you in the face and ending the bail reform laws, getting rid of these weak prosecutors like Alvin Bragg who want to help out black and brown people as they allege, but it's not helping anyone because, again, I'm going to repeat it once more. How does it help black and brown people when you have criminals out here who attack black and brown people? And I know that some people will sit there and talk about mental health, but I got to call BS on that because the main reason why I believe a lot of these guys are acting out is, one, because they're bitch made, and two, they are out here smoking this weed that was made legal. Those are the two reasons I believe those individuals are smoking. But technology is going to stop all of this. No, what really is going to stop all of this is conceding that many of these leftist policies that were implemented, say, in the late 2010s by Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio are complete failures. And they're failures because they don't help we, the people in New York City, be able to have a good quality of life because when you have incompetent leadership, they can't lead you anywhere except a ditch. And I lived through that in the 1970s and 1980s when Ed Koch was mayor and David Dinkins was mayor. And the sad part is that as we went back to blue, the city went back into the sewers, and that's where we are once again. But this will fly over people's heads because they can't see the reality in front of them. No, because they're in their feelings about Donald Trump. They don't see the direction they're going in, and the direction they're going in basically is a vicious cycle that's taking New York City straight down the drain. Now, if you want to pick up some of my positive black fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the Steam series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my black sorority novel, The Thetas, and my black vampire novel, Eternal Night, you can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Smashware's The iBookstore, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and you can also find them at big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you want to see me make more videos talking about how bad life is here in New York City, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes' Illuminati, the man who rules the world, takes on the head of the global elite in this all-new action-packed John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' Illuminati in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS, Amari's Revenge. The goddess next door is confronted by a Nubian queen out for revenge at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in this inaugural ISIS series adventure. Get your copy of ISIS, Amari's Revenge in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.